Thanks so much for joining us for this week's edition of Renewing the Mind. Last week, I mentioned that my daily Bible reading had taken me to the book of Psalms. This week, Psalm 10 caught my attention. It is a great example of the emotions expressed in the Psalms and on how meditating on God, which is really what the book of Psalms is, simply meditations on God, can completely change our perspective on things. Psalm 10 is probably too long for me to read it in its entirety, but I encourage you to sit down with it and experience what I'm telling you for yourselves. Psalm 10 is a psalm written by David, Israel's most famous king, well, before King Jesus. When this psalm begins, David is distressed. He says, "Why, Lord, do you stand so far off? Why do you hide yourself in times of trouble?" One of the reasons I think I'm drawn to this psalm is because of David's boldness in taking his complaints to God. David comes to God and says, "Yo, God, where are you? Why are you not around when I need you?" I love that. We never need to hide our emotions from God. Sure, we absolutely approach him with reverence and respect every time. But God knows we get frustrated. God knows we get angry. There's no sense hiding it from him. God wants us to be honest with him always, and God can take it. He would much rather have our honest anger than our false praise. David spends the next 14 verses laying out his arguments to God. He expresses his frustration that the wicked seem to prosper and that God does nothing about it. At one point, he calls out to God, "Arise, Lord, lift up your hand, O God. Do not forget the helpless. Break the arm of the wicked man. Call the evildoer to account for his wickedness." Again, I love David's boldness here. He's saying, "Come on, God, get in the game. Help us. Use your mighty power and destroy the wicked." Now, David is a God-fearing man. He knows who the boss is here. He knows that God is the one who gives orders, not takes them. But David, in his honest moments with God, is the one urging God to act. He's not trying to boss God around. None of us can do that. But he's telling God how desperately he needs God's help in his life. Immediately after this, David's tone changes entirely. It's almost like now that he's gotten all this off his chest, he has an entirely new viewpoint on things. Listen to how he finishes the psalm, beginning in verse 16. "The Lord is king forever and ever. The nations will perish from his land. You, Lord, hear the desire of the afflicted. You encourage them and you listen to their cry, defending the fatherless and the oppressed, so that mere earthly mortals will never strike again terror." David's tone has gone from angry to hopeful. He's gone from presenting his requests to God, really presenting his demands to God, to recognizing all that God has done and will do. And remember, nothing has happened yet. God has not acted on anything David has been complaining about. David's situation is exactly the same. But he knows God so well and he loves him so much that his heart has already changed because he knows that God's got this. He trusts God. By thinking more about who God is, David goes from distressed to hopeful, from scared to confident. I don't know about you, but lately I've been feeling an awful lot like David in the beginning of this psalm. It seems like every day something has been happening that adds to my frustration and can make me question whether God is really paying any attention to what's going on. It drives me crazy that our kids cannot get the education they deserve and so badly need because of COVID. It breaks my heart that our country is so divided by race. These and so many other things have caused me in my heart to cry out to God like David did, "Where are you, God? When are you going to do something about all this?" But then I'm reminded of the extent of God's love for me, the blessings in my life, and the ultimate assurance I have that God is always in control, that he will always work all things for the good of those who love him. And that changes my perspective. When I put God in the middle of my thoughts and not me, everything changes. God's got this. Always has, always will. Spend some time this week experiencing God the way David did. Go ahead. Tell him your worries, your frustrations, even your anger. Be honest with him. Let him know what you think. Then remind yourself of the greatness of our God, His faithfulness, and His deep, amazing love for you. When you do that, God will fill your heart with love, assurance, and confidence. And like David, you will have an entirely new perspective on your troubles and on what God is doing in your life. Thanks again for joining us this week. Have a great week. Peace.